Morning sunlight streamed through the bay windows of the Henderson estate, casting long golden fingers across the marble kitchen countertops. Victor Henderson stood at the kitchen island, his reflection distorted in the polished granite surface as he stirred a spoonful of honey into a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea. From upstairs came the sound of the shower running Elena, his wife of 15 years, starting her daily routine. "Good morning, darling," Victor whispered to no one, his voice carrying a hollow cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. He reached into his robe pocket and removed a small vial filled with colorless liquid. His hands trembled slightly as he unscrewed the cap, hesitating for just a moment before tipping 3 drops into the delicate china cup. The poison disappeared instantly into the amber liquid, leaving no trace. Victor stirred the tea once more, watching the small whirlpool form and dissipate. How fitting, he thought, that something so beautiful could harbor such darkness, much like his marriage had for all these years. "Victor, is that you downstairs?" Elena's voice called from the upper level, sweet and melodious as always. "Yes, dear, just making your morning tea," he replied, amazed at how steady his voice sounded despite the thundering of his heart. He placed the cup on Elena's favorite saucer, one, with hand-painted blue forget-me-nots around the rim, and set it on a breakfast tray alongside a freshly baked croissant from the bakery downtown. His wife loved these small gestures, still believing after all these years that there was something worth salvaging in their relationship. The doorbell chimed, sending a jolt of panic through Victor's body. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not today. Not when everything was finally set in motion. "Victor, can you get that?" Elena called down. "It's probably Mother. She mentioned she might stop by this morning." Victor's mouth went dry. Greta, his mother-in-law, the woman who had never believed he was good enough for her daughter, who had watched his every move with disapproving eyes for 15 years, who controlled a family fortune that should have been Elena's and by extension his. "Of course," he replied, his eyes fixed on the tea. It was meant for Elena, not Greta. But then again, before he could follow that thought, the kitchen door swung open and Elena appeared, her dark hair still damp from the shower, wrapped in a silk robe that accentuated her delicate frame. At 43, she still possessed a beauty that had captivated him when they first met, though he had long stopped noticing it. "I'll get the door," she said, placing a casual kiss on his cheek as she passed. "You've already made tea, how thoughtful." Victor watched her walk away, grace in every step, and felt a momentary twinge of something like regret. It vanished quickly, replaced by the cold determination that had been building in him for months. Victor Henderson had not always been the kind of man who would contemplate killing his wife. 20 years ago, he had been ambitious, charming, and full of promise, a rising star at an architectural firm with dreams of designing buildings that would reshape city skylines. Then he had met Elena Thornfield at a charity gala, the beautiful heiress to the Thornfield publishing empire. She had captivated him with her genuine laugh and the way she seemed unimpressed by the wealth that surrounded her. Their courtship had been swift and passionate. Elena had fallen for Victor's creative vision and his apparent disinterest in her family's fortune. Victor had fallen for Elena's kindness, her intelligence, and though he would never have admitted it, the security her wealth represented. Greta Thornfield had seen through him from the beginning. "You're making a mistake, Elena," she had told her daughter the night before the wedding. "He doesn't love you for who you are. He loves what you can give him." But Elena had defended him fiercely, cutting her mother off mid-sentence. "You're wrong about him, Mother. Victor loves me for me. The money means nothing to him." It hadn't been entirely true. Victor hadn't married Elena for her money, but he had certainly considered it a welcome bonus. What he hadn't counted on was Greta's iron grip on the family finances. When Elena's father died 3 years into their marriage, everyone had expected Elena to inherit control of the family business and fortune. Instead, the controlling interest had passed to Greta, with provisions that Elena would only gain full access after her mother's passing. Over the years, Victor had watched his own career stagnate, while living in the shadow of the Thornfield wealth, always comfortable, but never truly in control. His resentment had grown quietly, like a cancer, feeding on every critical comment from Greta, every gentle suggestion from Elena that perhaps he should try harder with his work. Elena, for her part, had remained loving and supportive, Even as Victor grew increasingly distant, she had weathered his mood swings and forgiven his occasional cruelties, believing that somewhere inside was still the man she had fallen in love with. She had suggested therapy, both individually and as a couple, but Victor had refused, seeing it as an admission of weakness. "I don't need someone telling me what's wrong with me," he had snapped when she brought it up last year. "Especially not when I'm paying for it, with your mother's money." The comment had hurt Elena deeply, but she had merely nodded and walked away, unwilling to escalate the argument. That was Elena's way to avoid conflict, maintain peace, and hope that love would eventually overcome all obstacles. Greta Thornfield, at 78, remained formidable. Despite her advancing age, her mind was sharp as ever, particularly when it came to business matters and her suspicions about her son-in-law. She visited the Henderson home several times a week, ostensibly to check on Elena, but really, Victor believed, to remind him of his place in the family hierarchy. "Still working on that community center design, Victor?" she would ask with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's been, 3 years now? I suppose great art takes time." She never missed an opportunity to reference the projects he had abandoned or the deadlines he had missed. In the early years, Victor had tried to win her approval, but after a decade of failure, he had given up. Now their interactions were carefully choreographed performances of civility, hiding mutual contempt. The family dynamic had settled into an uncomfortable equilibrium, Victor resenting both women, Elena trying to keep peace between the two people she loved most, and Greta watching over her daughter with protective vigilance. Until 6 months ago, when everything changed. The diagnosis had come as a shock to everyone. Greta Thornfield, indomitable force of nature, had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim: 6 months, perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. Elena had been devastated, throwing herself into researching treatments and arranging for the best care money could buy. Victor had received the news with a complex mixture of emotions. Outwardly, he displayed appropriate concern, comforting his wife and offering to help with arrangements. Inwardly, he had felt a shameful surge of hope. Greta's passing would mean Elena would finally inherit the Thornfield fortune outright. Their financial situation would transform overnight. But then came the second shock. During a family meeting with the Thornfield legal team, it was revealed that Greta had updated her will. The majority of the business shares would indeed pass to Elena, but with a complicated trust structure that would prevent Victor from accessing the funds. There was also a substantial donation to a foundation for recovering addicts, a pointed reference to Victor's struggle with gambling in the early years of their marriage. "It's for your own protection, darling," Greta had told Elena, not bothering to lower her voice though Victor sat right beside them. "This way, the money will always be there for you, no matter what happens." The implication was clear. No matter what happens with Victor. That night, alone in his study with a glass of whiskey, Victor had felt something break inside him. 15 years of resentment crystallized into hatred, not just for Greta, but for Elena, to Elena, who had never stood up to her mother, who had never truly believed in him enough to demand his rightful place in the family. Victor began researching undetectable poisons the next day. Over the following months, as Greta underwent treatment and Elena devoted herself to her mother's care, Victor refined his plan. He established an alibi by starting a new architectural project, his first serious work in years, giving him reason to be away from the house for long periods. He used these absences to meet with a former client with connections to the black market, eventually securing a rare toxin derived from a tropical plant. "It's untraceable," the man had assured him in a dimly lit bar downtown. "Causes cardiac arrest. By the time anyone thinks to look for poison, it will have metabolized completely. They'll blame it on stress or a pre-existing condition." Victor had paid an exorbitant sum for the vial, using money he had secretly skimmed from their joint account over several months. The poison now burned a hole in his pocket as he stood in the kitchen, commitment and doubt warring within him. Elena had noticed his changed behavior, interpreting it as a positive sign. "You seem more energized lately," she had commented one evening. "I'm glad you're working on a new project. I've always believed in your talent." Her words had cut deeper than any criticism could have. For a moment, he had considered abandoning his plan, perhaps even confessing his darker thoughts to her. But then Greta had called, and he watched Elena jump to attention, ready to cater to her mother's every whim. And the moment had passed. In recent weeks, Elena had begun bringing her mother to the house more frequently. Greta was weakening despite the treatments, and Elena wanted her to be comfortable. Victor had been forced to interact with his mother-in-law daily, maintaining a facade of concern while his hatred grew. Yesterday, as they had sat for an uncomfortable family dinner, Greta had announced her intention to transfer control of several key Thornfield assets to a board of directors rather than directly to Elena. It's to ensure the company's stability during transition, she had explained, but her eyes had flickered to Victor briefly. That night, he had removed the vial from its hiding place in his workshop and placed it in his robe pocket. Tomorrow, he had decided, it ends tomorrow. The doorbell chimed again more insistently this time. From the foyer, Victor heard Elena greeting her mother, their voices mingling in the easy familiarity of two people who trusted each other implicitly. "Mother, you're early. I'm not even dressed yet." "I couldn't sleep, darling. These new medications keep me up half the night." Victor quickly arranged his features into a welcoming expression as the two women entered the kitchen. Greta looked frielier than she had even a week ago, leaning heavily on a cane, her once commanding presence diminished by illness. Still, her eyes were sharp as ever as they assessed Victor standing by the kitchen island. "Victor," she acknowledged with a nod. "Early riser today, I see." "Greta," he replied with practiced warmth. "You're looking well. The treatments must be working." Elena shot him a grateful look, misinterpreting his comment as genuine concern rather than the cruel irony it was. "I made tea," Victor said, gesturing to the cup on the counter. "For Elena, but I can make another pot if you like some, Greta." "That's very thoughtful," Elena said, moving toward the cup. "Actually, Mother, why don't you take this one? I know how you love Earl Grey in the morning. I'll make another for myself." Time seemed to slow as Victor watched his wife pick up the poisoned teacup and carry it toward her mother. His heart pounded wildly in his chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. The poison was carefully measured for Elena's weight and metabolism, not for a frail, cancer-ridden old woman. Greta would die within minutes, not hours as he had planned for Elena. There would be no time for him to establish his alibi. "Actually," Victor began, but his voice emerged as a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Actually, I made that specifically for Elena. I know how she likes it with honey instead of sugar." "Oh, Mother takes honey too," Elena replied casually, placing the cup before Greta, who had settled at the kitchen table. "Don't you, Mother?" "I do, though I wouldn't have expected Victor to remember such a detail," Greta said, her thin fingers wrapping around the delicate china. Victor felt sweat beading on his forehead as Greta raised the cup to her lips. He had to stop this, not out of concern for Greta, but for himself. If she died here now, suspicion would fall immediately on him. "Wait," he said too loudly. Both women looked at him in surprise. I think that cup might have been sitting too long. Let me make a fresh pot for everyone." He reached the cup, but Elena smoothly intercepted his hand, her fingers wrapping firmly around his wrist. For the first time, Victor noticed something different in his wife's eyes, a hardness, a knowing that he had never seen before. "Don't worry, Victor," Elena said quietly. "Mother should definitely drink this tea. After all, you prepared it so carefully." It was in that moment that Victor knew Elena had seen him. Somehow, she had witnessed him adding the poison to the tea. This was an accident. It was a deliberate move to expose him. He looked from Elena to Greta, who was watching the interaction with narrowed eyes, the cup now suspended midway to her mouth. "Is something wrong with the tea, Victor?" Greta asked, her voice subtly stronger than it had been in months. The kitchen fell silent, a tableau of three people frozen in a moment of terrible understanding. Victor's mind raced through his options. He could knock the cup from Greta's hands, but that would be a confession in itself. He could claim he had added the wrong sweetener or some medication was owned by mistake, but Elena's expression told him she wouldn't support any such story. Victor was worried the tea might be too strong. Elena said last, her voice unnaturally calm. "Weren't you, darling?" Her eyes never left his, and in them, he saw not just knowledge, but something more painful disappointment. Not the shock of recent discovery, but the deep, settled disappointment of someone who had suspected the truth for a long time and had finally confirmed it. Yes, Victor managed to say, his mouth dry, too strong. I steeped it too long. Nonsense, Greta declared, her imperious tone returning. I like my tea strong. With deliberate slowness, she raised the cup again, her eyes challenging Victor over the rim. Mother, perhaps you should listen to Victor this once, Elena said. The words were a lifeline thrown to Victor, but the tone was not. There was something in Elena's voice a test, an ultimatum. Greta paused, the cup just below her lips. Elena? What's going on? Victor felt his world collapsing around him. His mind scrambled for a solution, any solution. In desperation, he lunged forward, knocking the cup from Greta's hand. It shattered on the floor, tea splashing across the white tiles. Victor, Greta exclaimed, recoiling in shock. Elena didn't move, didn't even flinch at the crash. She simply watched Victor with those knowing eyes. I saw you this morning, she said quietly. I came downstairs earlier than you thought. I saw what you put in my tea. Victor felt the blood drain from his face. Elena, I don't know what you think you saw, but don't, she interrupted, her voice breaking for the first time. Don't lie to me anymore. I've allowed too many lies already. Greta looked between them, confusion giving way to understanding. Elena, what is happening here? Elena's eyes remained fixed on Victor. My husband poisoned my tea this morning, and I deliberately gave it to you instead. Greta gasped, one hand flying to her throat. Not because I wanted you to drink it, Elena quickly clarified, finally looking at her mother, but because I needed to know if he would let you drink it. I needed to see what he would do when faced with the reality of his actions. Victor felt the room spinning around him. Elena, you don't understand. I wasn't. Wasn't what? Elena's voice was ice. Wasn't trying to kill me. I saw the vial. Victor. I recognized it. The same type of poison that killed Representative Morrison. Last year, it was all over the news. Colorless, odorless, causes cardiac arrest. Greta was pulling out her phone with trembling hands. I'm calling the police. There's no need, Mother, Elena said, placing a restraining hand on Greta's arm. The tea wasn't poisoned. Both Victor and Greta stared at her in shock. What? Victor whispered. I replaced a vial in your workshop last week, Elena explained, her voice terribly controlled. With water. I've known something was wrong for months. Victor, you've been different focused, energized, but secretive. At first, I thought you were having an affair. I hired a private investigator. Victor felt the floor drop from beneath him. All this time, while he thought he was being so careful. He followed you to that meeting with Julian Mercer, Elena continued, a man known for his connections to certain illegal substances. After that, I started paying more attention. Found the vial in your workshop. Had it analyzed. You've been investigating me? Victor asked, his voice hollow. I've been trying to understand what happened to the man I married, Elena replied, her composure finally cracking. Tears welled in her eyes. What happened to you, Victor? When did you start hating me enough to want me dead? Victor sank into a chair, the adrenaline draining from his system. I don't hate you, he whispered. Then why? Elena demanded. The money, Greta supplied, her voice surprisingly gentle. It's always been about the money, hasn't it, Victor? Victor couldn't meet either woman's eyes. The truth, spoken aloud, sounded so petty, so beneath contempt. You never gave me a chance, he said to Greta. You decided from the beginning that I wasn't good enough. Perhaps, Greta acknowledged, but was I wrong? The hours that followed felt like a fever dream to Victor. Elena had asked her mother to give them privacy, and remarkably, Greta had agreed, though not before delivering a parting shot. I'll be at the Thornfield house when you're ready. Elena, the security team has been notified about Victor. They won't allow him on the property. After Greta left, Elena and Victor sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the shattered teacup still on the floor between them, a physical representation of their broken marriage. Why didn't you call the police? Victor finally asked. Elena's eyes were red-rimmed but dry now. Because despite everything, I still remember the man who once stayed up all night to design a dream house for us. The man who held my hand at my father's funeral. The man who once loved me. I did love you, Victor said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Maybe I still do in some twisted way. That's not love, Elena replied softly. Love doesn't calculate profit and loss. Love doesn't resent. And love certainly doesn't poison. Victor had no answer to that. I prepared divorce papers, Elena continued. They're fair more than fair, considering what you attempted. You'll receive a settlement that will allow you to start over somewhere else. In return, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement about all of this. Victor stared at her, uncomprehending. You're letting me go? After what I tried to do. I'm not doing it for you, Elena clarified. I'm doing it for me. Having you arrested, going through a public trial, it would destroy what's left of my life. And Mother doesn't need the stress, not with a condition. The mention of Greta's illness brought another wave of shame crashing over Victor. He had been planning to kill his wife, while she was already grieving her dying mother. I don't deserve your mercy, he said quietly. No, you don't, Elena agreed. But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need to move forward. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden she had lovingly tended for 15 years. You have until tomorrow to pack your things and leave. The settlement will be transferred once the papers are signed. Victor watched her, really seeing her for the first time in years, the straight spine, the quiet dignity, the strength he had somehow never fully appreciated. For what it's worth, he said, I am sorry, not just for getting caught, but for what I became. Elena turned to face him, her expression softening slightly. I believe you are sorry now. But Victor, you became what you chose to become, one decision at a time. No one forced you down this path. Her words struck him like physical blows because they were true. He had made countless small choices that led to this moment, choosing resentment over gratitude, bitterness over effort, blame over responsibility. Do you think people can change? He asked, surprising himself with the question. Elena considered this carefully. I think they can, but only if they truly want to. Only if they're willing to face the darkest parts of themselves without flinching. She paused and added, I hope you find that courage, Victor, not for my sake, but for yours. With that, she left the kitchen, leaving Victor alone with his shattered cup and his shattered life. Later that day, as Victor packed his belongings, he found himself in their bedroom, staring at a photograph from their wedding day. They had looked so happy, so full of hope. He tried to remember that feeling, that certainty that they would build something beautiful together. He slipped the photograph into his suitcase, not as a memento of what he had lost, but as a reminder of what he had thrown away. 1 year later, Victor sat in a modest apartment in another city, reviewing the final designs for a community center he had been working on for months. After leaving the Henderson estate, he had used the settlement money to seek therapy, confront his addiction issues, and slowly rebuild a professional reputation with small, meaningful projects. He had not spoken to Elena since the day he left, respecting her need for distance. But he had written her 6 months ago, a letter of genuine apology that made no excuses and asked for nothing in return. He hadn't expected a response, and he hadn't received one until today. The envelope had arrived with the morning mail, Elena's elegant handwriting instantly recognizable. Victor's hands trembled as he opened it, much as they had trembled the morning he had poisoned the tea. Inside was a brief note and a newspaper clipping. Victor, Asterisk's mother passed away peacefully last week. Before she died, she asked me to tell you that she forgives you. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I'm working on it. I thought you might want to know about the attached article, Asterisk. Wishing you healing. Elena. The newspaper clipping was from the business section of the Thornfield City paper, announcing a new architectural scholarship established by the Thornfield Foundation. The scholarship would support students from disadvantaged backgrounds who showed promise in sustainable design, something Victor had been passionate about early in his career. Victor read the article 3 times, his vision blurring with tears. The scholarship was named after his maternal grandfather, who had inspired his love of architecture. It was a detail he had shared with Elena on their third date, a memory she preserved all these years despite everything that had happened. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that the person he had once been the person he was trying to become again was worth remembering. Victor carefully folded the letter and clipping and placed them in his desk drawer. Then he returned to his work with renewed purpose, designing spaces that would bring beauty and function to communities that needed them. It wasn't the glamorous career he had once envisioned, but it was honest work that made a difference. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with himself. The bitter cup that Victor had prepared for Elena had eventually been emptied not of poison, but of the resentment, greed, and self-pity that had poisoned his soul for so long. The morning that had begun with a plan for murder had ended with the first step toward redemption. Elena had moved on with her life, taking control of the Thornfield Empire with a wisdom and compassion that would have made her father proud. Greta had departed this world with the knowledge that her daughter was stronger than either of them had realized. And Victor? Victor had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the real poison wasn't the tea, but in his heart. The antidote wasn't wealth or status or revenge, but the humility to recognize his own failings and the courage to begin again. As for the cup itself, that delicate china, with the forget-me-not pattern Elena had kept it, the single remaining piece from a set that had been in her family for generations. She had mended it, the fine crack still visible, but the cup whole again, functional despite its flaws. She used it every morning, a reminder not of betrayal but of survival, of the strength she had found within herself on that terrible morning when the bitter cup had revealed the truth. The moral of this story isn't that all broken things can be mended, or that all betrayals can be forgiven. Some cups, once shattered, cannot be put back together. But the pieces can always be gathered and transformed into something new, something different, perhaps, but no less valuable for having been broken.